Joshua is Washington Stand senior writer. Joshua, thank you for joining us. Thanks for coming on Washington Watch.
Hi, Jody. Happy to be here.
Well, listen, I'm glad you're able to come on because I've got a couple of things that I want to ask you that I wasn't sure if we were going to be able to get to, but we've got at least 12 Democratic attorney generals from various states who have sued. They're suing the Trump administration. What do you think about all of this? Just kind of give us the 30,000-foot view of what's going on.
That's right. 12 Democratic state attorneys general have challenged the Trump administration's tariff policies in a special federal court dealing with trade issues. It's based in Manhattan, and basically their argument is that the Constitution gives the power to collect duties to Congress. Congress has delegated some of those powers to the president, but they argue that the conditions and prerequisites placed on those powers have not been met here, and they specifically argue that the law the Trump administration invoked to implement this particular tariff regime that deals with emergency situations, that it does not allow tariffs at all, does not authorize tariffs at all, and that even if it did, the way that Trump has done it does not constitute an emergency.
Very interesting. This whole Trump tariff issue is making waves all across the board. One question I had, Joshua, with all of this is the standing. It seems like we have had so many lawsuits in recent years where people that you would think obviously had standing in a case, it was declared they had no standing, so the case couldn't go forward. What about these AGs? Do they or will they have standing, do you think, as this thing goes forward?
That is a good question. The argument that they made in their lawsuit was essentially that certain entities of the state government, such as universities, had to make some overseas purchases and pay more for those purchases because of the tariffs. And they also argued that their cost of doing business, just cost of administration in general, would go up because of these tariffs making the price of everything go up domestically. I guess it's a similar argument to what the states made a couple years ago when they challenged the Biden administration over its cancellation of federal student loans, with the state of Missouri arguing that they had a state entity that held a lot of those loans, which ultimately was the argument that established Missouri's standing in court. I don't know if this is sufficient to grant them standing, especially in this other like specialty trade court. So we'll have to see what the court does here. I'm not really sure whether they'll have standing or not.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, likewise, and one that I've been thinking about because that has become a major issue, it seems, on so many different, pretty important legal trials that have, and cases that we've watched here recently. So let me ask you this. The U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent continues to announce things that I think are pretty significant economically, globally. And one of those pertains to the global economy and the pushback, if you will, of the Trump administration on everything from climate to transgender stuff. What is happening from the White House on the global stage as it relates to the economy right now?
That's right. Secretary Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, gave a speech yesterday to an international trade association just based here in D.C., a few blocks from his office, in which he said that the Trump administration would work to essentially have more leverage over these international institutions. We pay the most money to these institutions. We have the most voting power, but oftentimes we take a back seat and let others drive them. And he said that we would specifically try to move them away from work on climate change, gender, and social issues. He was talking specifically about the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and then the World Bank there. Those were established when those were established, Congress assigned the Treasury Department to be kind of America's point of contact with those organizations, which is why Bessent is the one taking the lead on addressing those institutions in particular.
You know, what's fascinating about this is not only the global impact that this is going to have, which I think is pretty stunning in itself, but the marked difference that this is from the previous administration, the Biden administration. Are you hearing much talk about this really a reversal in the direction on the global market?
It really is a reversal. In fact, President Biden was the one who nominated the current president of the World Bank. In 2023, it was the former MasterCard CEO, A.J. Banga, who's an Indian American, and President Biden nominated him specifically to work on addressing climate change at the World Bank. So this is a 180-degree reversal. You know, we see it in other ways as well. The Biden administration was trying to push progressive policies through the World Health Organization's pandemic treaty and other things like that. You know, when they got stymied by the checks and balances in Congress, they turned to international organizations to push their progressive agenda. And the Trump administration has said enough.
Are we hearing anything yet in terms of what kind of impact or how this is being received from other nations, or are we in kind of a wait and see mode, or what's happening from a response perspective?
I think this was just the first, initial shot across the bow, if you will. We can probably imagine that some of the more conservative countries, say in sub-Saharan Africa, will welcome the news, whereas some of the more progressive countries in Europe might still be on board with continuing the push. So, there's a lot of countries, they all have a little bit of say. The U.S. has the most say, but our voting share is, in most of these institutions, somewhere between 15 and 20%. So we have, it's easiest for us to collect a coalition of the willing. We have a head start. But we still have to do the diplomatic legwork to find out which other countries are on board.
Were you surprised at all that the Treasury Secretary delivered this message?
It is interesting that he is the front man because, if you look at his basic biography, you wouldn't suspect him of being a social conservative in any way. He's had a long career working on Wall Street as an investor, as a hedge fund manager. He is openly gay. He worked actually for the George Soros for over a decade, managing his money. So this is a guy who's probably more comfortable, on Wall Street than in a Moms for Liberty event. But yet even he feels unfettered by Trump's electoral victory to push back against progressive ideological dogma and say, let's have international financial institutions focus on finance, not focus on this social agenda that is divisive and destructive.
Amazing. Joshua Arnold with Washington Stand, thank you for joining us.